Welcome to the Fear and Greed Business Interview. I'm Sean Aylmer. Every year, professional networking platform LinkedIn assesses the startup scene in Australia to produce its top startups list. It's a guide to which startups are attracting the most attention and luring top talent to work with them. Some of the companies you might have heard of, some may be flying under the radar. But when they're in industries from lab-grown meat to hypersonic rockets, you can be sure there's some good stories. Kayla Dengate is LinkedIn Australia's career expert. Kayla, welcome back to Fear and Greed.
It's wonderful to be here.
Okay, first up, how do you do it? How do you put this together?
Such a good question. So instead of choosing our favorites, which would be fun, we rely entirely on data. So we look at all of the millions of connections of people's activity on LinkedIn to pull together an idea of the companies that are attracting attention, that have people clamoring to work with them, that are growing their staff base and, are continuing on this, really great journey. And then to make sure that they're startups, we cap it so that they've only been around for 5 years and have 30 staff members or more. And when you think about that, to achieve what some of these organizations have achieved in 5 years is absolutely mind-blowing.
Yeah, sure is. Let's go through some of the companies on the list. Tell me about number one, Montu.
Sure thing. So Montu is a medicinal cannabis company that connects people that are looking to access this service with doctors who are informed and ready to make it happen.
Okay, and so what you're saying is that there is a lot of activity on LinkedIn, people looking for roles within the organisation, that's kind of primarily the nub of it?
Most definitely. And what we can see about Montu is they have been around since 2019. They've got 830 staff members, so they have grown rapidly. This is an organisation that is kicking goals. It is poaching talent from some of the top companies in Australia. And it's the type of place that people want to work, but also people want to hear more about it because it's part of an emerging sector here in Australia.
Okay, we talked about lab-grown meat. What's going on there?
So Vow is a startup that it's my favourite on the list, I'll be honest. So Vow is an Australian startup. They're all Australian. And they create lab-grown meat from animal cells. And what I love about Vow is the two founders share their story on LinkedIn. So I feel like I've been following along with the highs and lows as they go. Recently they got approval in Singapore to serve a parfait made out of an exotic meat. I'm trying to remember whether it was quail or duck.
Wow.
But I want to taste it. I want to try it. I can see why people are so interested in Vow because I want a behind the scenes tour.
Yeah, I mean, we'll get to some of the others in a moment, but that whole idea of using LinkedIn, of providing a way that people can actually see the growth and the behind the scenes tour and stuff like that. Do the best placed companies do that very well?
That's such a good question. And I think that when you look at today's job seekers, anybody who wants to work for a startup, they want to have a bit of skin in the game. They want to care about the organization. And when a founder is sharing that story, it's so much easier to feel like you could see yourself there. So I think, especially in terms of attracting talent, by being present on LinkedIn, it's drawing people to you. It's telling your story, and it can only be good for these companies that are growing so quickly.
Okay, Deathtech's the thing. Kayla, tell me about it.
Deathtech. So when we looked at the companies that rose up the ranks this year, there were two that we would consider being in the Deathtech space. And when you say, what is Deathtech? It's preparing for end of life. So we have SafeWill at number 10. It's a company that is an end of life planning platform. And then there's also another startup that looks at that kind of end of life space as well, called Bear. So it's really interesting from a societal point of view to ask ourselves, why is Deathtech an emerging industry? And I think, we have an aging population and, we have a generation of people who want to do things their way. They're not comfortable to look at end-of-life planning the same way that other generations have. So my prediction is that, these two organizations are rising the ranks and we might see more organizations that fit within that Deathtech startup space.
And number 11, I have to mention it, all about rockets, hypersonics launch systems. Tell me about that one.
Hypersonics Launch Systems is so interesting because they are developing hypersonic aircraft and engines that are powered by hydrogen and made using 3D printing technology. So, I said that I wanted a behind the scenes tour of Vow, get me on board as well with hypersonics because it just seems like Australian innovation on the world stage. And it's this great example of how kind of mechanical engineering and rockets and space and all the rest, Australia has a piece of that pie globally. And, we know that Aussies have innovative minds. So it's great to see a startup like this really kicking goals and showing what can be done here in Australia.
Stay with me, Kayla. We'll be back in a minute. I'm speaking to Kayla Dengate from LinkedIn Australia. It's funny, if you look at the top 10 or top 11, we'll put the rocket one in as well, they're very forward-looking companies. Not every one. I mean, there's a procurement company, for example, but then kind of meat substitutes, telehealth, medicinal cannabis. They are very forward-looking, the best or the highest ranked startups.
That's such a great point. And when you look at these companies, they've only been around for 5 years and they've grown so quickly, which shows that they're in spaces that need innovation and that it's areas where people are hungry for this service or this idea. And I guess that's why they're really forward pushing because, if you open a bakery, you're unlikely to get the scale and the size. But if you open a rocket company, then yeah, there's a lot of interest there.
Okay, so what's the startup scene looking like in Australia at the moment? I'm sure it's been through a tough period. Just raising capital would have been much harder in the last year or two.
Looks absolutely. Since the COVID-19 pandemic, it has been a really challenging time to launch a startup. But I think what that means is that the startups we're seeing coming up and securing, those large funding rounds are the ones that are lean, they're agile, and they're ideas that a lot of people believe in because you need to get that grassroots support to really get going. We're certainly seeing that there is more investment trickling into the startup space. And because it's a tight jobs market right now, there's also a lot of people who are clamoring to work for a company like this. So it feels like it's a great time where startups are, they're getting back into that jogging, striding motion. They're pushing forwards. There's great talent keen to work for them. And hopefully it's a sector that's going to move to stronger ground every month moving forwards.
It's a good point because we're talking about companies who are very successful in the startup world. The labour market is tight. What about startups that want to attract employees? What should they be doing?
I think that if you're a startup that wants to attract the best talent, the first thing I would suggest is to share your story. Let people know the amazing things you're doing, whether it's lab grown meat or telehealth appointments for fertility or, rockets shooting into the sky so that, professionals know who you are and start to sort of think about imagining themselves there. I would also say that a lot of these startups really look after their staff. So AI is changing so many different workplaces for the better. And no more is that so than in startups where, smaller organizations are trying to achieve a lot. They're trying to grow quickly. And a lot of these startups have told us about the ways that they are training their staff, the ways that they're kind of value adding and making sure that lifelong learning is embedded in who they are and what they do. So I think that for any startups looking to attract staff, make sure that you're telling your story, letting people know who you are, and sharing what the benefit is for them, which could well be great education opportunities.
And what about the flip side, applicants wanting to get into one of these startups? Any tricks to that?
I think that for a startup, you've got to show that you're the type of person who can be agile. You can be doing marketing one day and jumping in and doing a program that's about to launch internationally the next. So it's about showing those human skills like great communication, being flexible of mind, and an enthusiasm to learn and to share and to be part of something great.
Is it too early that you mentioned AI a moment ago and you're saying that it's a 5-year cap for startup firms? Is it too early to see the trend of AI coming through or are you seeing it already?
So a lot of these startups are embedding AI in what they do as opposed to being an AI specific organization. And as part of our criteria to be classified as a LinkedIn top startup, you've got to be completely independent. You've kind of been bought by another organization. But we have seen some amazing success stories in Australia. And the one that springs to mind is Leonardo, which is an Australian AI organization. It's a startup doing great things. Recently has a stake, bought by Canva. So, no longer fits in this particular idea of what a startup is, but it's an Australian-owned startup that's doing amazing things in the AI space.
So if you're being bought by Canva, you're probably doing all right. Kayla, thank you very much for talking to Fear and Greed this morning.
Wonderful to be here.
That was Kayla Dengate from LinkedIn Australia. This is the Fear and Greed business interview. Join us every morning for the full episode of Fear and Greed, daily business news for people who make their own decisions. I'm Sean Aylmer. Enjoy your day.